I'm Chiquita Banana, and I've come to say bananas have to ripen in a certain way, and when they're flecked with brown and have a golden hue, bananas taste the best and are the best for you. You can put them in a salad. Green? No, not yet, my dear. That greenish way you're looking means that you are ripe for cooking.
How about me?
No. When you are fully ripe, my dear, those little flecks of brown appear.
Me?
You're most digestible, my friend. Delicious, too, from end to end. You can put them in a pie, any way you want to eat them. It's impossible to beat them. But bananas like the climate of the very, very tropical equator. So you should never put bananas in the refrigerator. Bananas are a solid food that doctors now include in baby's diet. And since they are so good for baby, I think we all should try it.
Oh!
See.
The United Fruit Company started in 1871 when Henry Meigs signed a contract with Costa Rica to build a railroad. Meigs did this with his nephew Keith Copper, who took over after Meigs died, realizing that the railroad company could be used to transport fruit. Keith started planting fruits such as bananas as a cheap source of food for his workers. During this time, nearly 5,000 men died due to the extreme working conditions, including Meigs himself. This is when Keith takes charge of the project. During this time, the United Fruit Company owned as much as 90% of the fruit market. The company then came to own or lease properties in Honduras, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Panama, Colombia, Cuba, Jamaica, and other countries of Central and South America, and also the West Indies. It owned 50% of the private land in Honduras and 70% of all private land in every mile of railroad in Guatemala. In 1882, Costa Rica defaulted on their payment to Keith for the first time. Keith then had to borrow $1.2 million from London's bank and other private investors to continue with his railroad project to continue moving fruit throughout the country. After Costa Rica defaulted to Keith on the payments, Costa Rica agreed to give Keith 800,000 acres of tax-free land along his railroad and a 99 years lease operations of the railroad as a renegotiation of their debt. The railroad wasn't completed until 1890. Once the railroad was completed, however, Keith realized that the railroad business wasn't profitable, so he decided to focus on the banana business in Central America. In 1899, Keith lost a huge investment of his because a New York City broker went bankrupt. This then caused him to merge his banana business with the Boston Fruit Company, which formed the United Fruit Company. The United Fruit Company cleared and planted underdeveloped tracts of land, created extensive railroad and port facilities, and operated a large steamship unit known as the Great White Fleet.
I bring a song about bananas. I sing it low, I sing it high, yay, yay, and if you keep with Americanos, sing a song about bananas.
Bananas can be eaten at any time and served at any meal.
It is called El Popo because it owns vast tracts of land all across Latin America. Its tentacles stretch into every presidential palace. And in this region, presidents are military dictators. Sam Zemere, the banana man, is at the helm of United Fruit. He got his start in the banana business by personally financing the overthrow of the president of Honduras in 1924.
December 6, 1928 is a day that will live on in infamy as a day called the Banana Massacre. Workers had been wanting improving work conditions for the past 10 years. They finally had enough and decided to go on strike for better working conditions, such as working a 6-day work week for 8-hour days, They wanted medical insurance benefits and to not be paid in scripts or credit at company stores. The United Fruit Company had a lot of say in the Colombian government, though, because they owned a lot of land. So the United Fruit Company used their sway to have the Colombian army come in and take out a lot of strikers with mounted machine guns. They also had strong contacts with the U.S. State Department because the strike was getting so bad. The U.S. actually sent an American ship to the area, but a U.S. ambassador said that it was only a non-military ship. By 1930, the company had become the largest employer in Central America by absorbing more than 20 rival firms, acquiring amounts of capital exceeding $215 million, and becoming the largest employer in Central America. For the years 1931 to 1944, a new dictator in Colombia was dictator Jorge Ubico. The United Fruit Company owned 42% of the land in Guatemala. They didn't have to pay taxes on the land or participate on import duties. But even after the dictator fell out of power, they still monopolized production and exportation of bananas. They owned Guatemala's telephone and telegraph system and a majority of the railroad track.
Guatemala was a country where the previous military rulers had practically handed the country over to the United Fruit Company. They were in their pocket.
Ella dictaba.
He was a dictator from an economic point of view.
Factores económicos.
United Fruit had the final word about many things.
After a while, the Guatemalan government began to actually compete with the United Fruit Company in the banana industry because they believed that the United Fruit Company owned too much land and had too much control within the country.
In the spring of 1951, United Fruit is suddenly confronted with an ominous threat. His name? Jacobo Arbenz. He is the newly elected president of Guatemala. Arbenz is swept to power on a promise to give land to peasants, to the Mayan Indians who farm the country's plantations.
In 1954, President of Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz Guzman, came up with a new labor code which would take away 40% of the United Fruit Company's land.
The United Fruit Company is furious. Tom Corcoran is the fruit company's hired gun. On the Hill, he's Tommy the Cork, a Washington insider who can open any door. Cork tries to persuade those in power that a threat to its banana plantations is a threat to national security.
United Fruit did whatever it could to link the agrarian reform to a communist danger. And in the 1953, 1954, it had a pretty receptive audience.
Cork's audience is receptive for other reasons, too. John Foster Dulles and his brother Alan Dulles have both done legal work for United Fruit. The Assistant Secretary of State for Inter-American Affairs, John Moores Cabot, owns stock in United Fruit. His brother Thomas was president of the company in 1948. And the American ambassador to the United Nations, Henry Cabot Lodge, also has money riding on United Fruit.
The Fruit Company didn't want to lose their territory, so they convinced the United States that Guatemala was communist. The United Fruit Company had many ties with the U.S. government that it used to exert its influence.
Company officials warned journalists of creeping communism in Latin America.
They gave them the story that the Marxists were coming in and trying to kick them out of the country. And this story became the front page headlines in the American press when the newsmen returned.
With the public, the opinion makers, and the politicians on their side, the Dulles brothers begin planning the overthrow of Jacobo Arbenz. For John Foster Dulles, Arbenz's removal becomes a personal crusade.
John Foster Dulles was a religious fanatic. He believed that you had to defeat communism. It was a struggle between good and evil. He felt that this was a fight to the death. He was ready for war.
The U.S. government then sent CIA, Army, and planes to Guatemala to overthrow the communist leader. They bombed military bases and government radio stations, and eventually the president was overthrown. Guatemalans just wanted land reform for their country, and they were punished with the loss of land, loss of freedom, and hunger because of the influence of the United Fruit Company. This overthrow of government resulted in a civil war of 36 years and estimated 250,000 deaths. In 1970, United Fruit Company merged with AMK Company and changed to United Brands. However, bad management of the company eventually led it to becoming crippled with debt. In 1984, United Brands changed its name to Chiquita. In 2004, the U.S. Justice Department accused Chiquita of paying a terrorist group in Colombia to protect their plantations. They stated that Chiquita monetarily supported the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, a leftist terrorist group that has plotted to assassinate Hugo Chavez, the president of Venezuela, until 2013. Chiquita, or the United Fruit Company, has frequently been accused of bribing government officials in exchange for preferential treatment, exploiting its workers, paying little by the way of taxes to the governments of the countries in which it's operated, and working ruthlessly to consolidate monopolies.
So this is an amazing story. It's about the 9/11 victims' families looking for justice. They're trying to pass a bill called the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act. Okay? Now what this bill does is it says if you aided the terrorist who attacked us, not just on 9/11, but any terrorist that attacked Americans, killed Americans, we should be able to sue you. Now the reason for that is not because they want the money, it's because they want to be able to financially basically debilitate those terrorist groups and the groups that sponsor them and aid and abet them. So it's an interesting law, has almost no opposition. Again, the people behind this are the 9/11 families united for justice against terrorism. There's about 6,500 people that have been affected by terrorism that are part of this. So who are the people who are blocking this bill? Chiquita Bananas. What in the world? Now, why are they blocking it, right? Well, I'll get to that in a second. First, let me tell you how they're blocking it. Chiquita spent on lobbyists from Covington and Burling, which is a law firm you often hear about. Eric Holder used to work there. He's our Attorney General now. Lanny Brewer used to work there. He was the head of the Criminal Enforcement Division at the Justice Department. He now works there again at a higher salary and a higher position. They gave $450,000 to that law firm for lobbying to make sure this specific bill does not pass. Great. Among other things that they work on, Chiquita spent lobbying against, again, specifically JASTA, this bill, $780,000 over the past year and a half.
According to WallStreetDaily.com, if the law passed, it could have been extremely damaging for Chiquita, which had already admitted to pay off a terrorist organization for nearly a decade. That means that the company could become a free game for victims looking to file a lawsuit.
In March 2007, Chiquita admitted that it made payments from 1997 to 2004 to the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, known by its acronym in Spanish, AUC, a paramilitary organization that the U.S. government had designated a terrorist group. Chiquita settled a criminal complaint by the U.S. government at that time and agreed to pay a $25 million fine.
They say, oh man, we operate in Colombia, and Colombia was actually their most important and profitable subsidiary. And these terrorists were operating in Colombia. They made us do it. Sure they did. In reality, these banana companies have had huge influence in Central America for a long time. We, the United States of America, organized several coups on behalf of banana companies. That's where the term Banana Republic comes from. Now they've got a Republican in a very important position, basically working for them, Representative Bob Goodlatte. He is at an incredibly important position because he's the head of the House Judiciary Committee, where the bill JASTA is now sitting, going nowhere.
Many people are not happy with Chiquita's involvement with JASTA.
When they go meet with the congressman himself, the families are crying, and one woman tells a story about how her husband died, and this guy, and then one daughter comes in and says about how her father died, and he interrupts her and says, "Weren't you compensated for that?" One person talks about how one wife, about how only one part of her husband's body was found, his head. Meanwhile, this guy Zachary Summers, according to everybody that was at the meeting, is literally picking lint off of his jacket, right? Totally uninterested in what's going on. And then when he's asked, hey, did Chiquita come in and talk to you guys about making sure you stop this bill? He says, yeah. Were they the only people who came and talked to you that want this bill stopped? And he says, yeah.
Reason why the chairman would not support progress on JASTA because they received feedback from different organizations about the effects of the legislation. Also, businesses opposed to this legislation because they were afraid of potential lawsuits.
Now, if they were law-abiding, they wouldn't have had problems with this law in the first place. The real problem is to protect the companies that were not law-abiding, that did support and finance terrorist groups.
On March 11, 2008, a new federal lawsuit was filed in New York against Chiquita by the families of 5 missionaries allegedly slain by fighters from the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC. The payment Chiquita made to the FARC supported the act of terrorism as the U.S. government designated FARC as a terrorist organization. Chiquita Brands International has admitted to paying nearly $2 million to right-wing death squads in Colombia, and the blowback from United Fruit's way of doing business still haunts Latin America today. Recently, Chiquita's supplier Rainforest Alliance was involved in a lawsuit about their involvement in certified Chiquita farms and their environmental organization. Water and Sanitation Health, or WASH, claimed that Chiquita farms are not sustainable and the distributors' partner farms in southern Guatemala have contaminated drinking water with fertilizers and fungicides and have airdrop pesticides close to schools and homes. The group also claims that Rainforest Alliance, which is Chiquita's supplier, is questionable because they certified Chiquita's farm and advertised for them. The latest lawsuit alleges Rainforest Alliance only grows as little as 15% of Chiquita bananas under sustainable conditions. WASH executive director and an attorney worries that the level of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides that go into producing the bananas are causing the groundwater and rivers to be polluted.